Welcome to Guatemala. Now I'm betting that most of you can't point out Guatemala on a map. Newsflash, it's just south of Mexico, but it rarely sees as many visitors. So I've spent the last week at lakeside villages, quaint little mountainous towns at the base of semi-active volcanoes, and now the heart of the biggest city in Central America. To say that it's been an adventure would be stating the obvious, but I'm gonna say it anyway. It's been a super awesome adventure, and I've chosen this week to focus more on the journeys that I've taken, rather than just the destinations themselves, which, I mean, they've been pretty freaking rad. So let me share some of those journeys with you. The first journey I want to talk about is my first ride on a chicken bus, or camioneta. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, chicken bus doesn't actually mean that there are chickens on the bus, but the name does come from a time when locals used to transport their goods on these buses. A lot of times there were chickens, so it just kind of became the nickname for it. Basically, chicken buses are repurposed American old school buses, like those big yellow ones that after 10 or so years, they get sold or given to countries south of the border, such as Guatemala, where they pimp them out, they turn them into these insanely crazy forms of transportation that mainly locals and adventure junkies use to get from place to place. I have no clue where my bravery came from, but after landing in Guatemala, spent a night in a pretty crappy hostel, I decided I'm gonna ride a chicken bus to the lake. Should take about 4 hours. So what I ended up doing was actually asking my hostel owner where I could catch the chicken bus. He told me where to go. It's basically this depot, unofficial depot, where all the buses kind of just gather. And you walk up and everybody's shouting where the buses are going. Some of the buses have the names painted on the front windows, but I don't know enough of the towns in Guatemala to understand if that's the right direction of them going. So I just walk up and here's this gringa with this like wide open expression, like, where am I going? Guys come up to me and they start asking me like, where are you going, where are you going? I say, oh, I need to go to Rachelle, and somebody just grabs my arm and puts me on a bus. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm going on this bus. It was an insane journey. We were whipping up and down the mountains, careening around corners. I was stuck in the back. Fortunately, I thought ahead and had taken some motion sickness pills, which I normally don't need, but I just wanted to be extra cautious because who knew how long I was gonna be on this bus, if I was gonna get sick. I don't know how to say, hey, I gotta puke in Spanish. So I'm on the bus and I'm trying to talk to this old guy that's sitting next to me. He's super cute, he's asking me questions. And I tell him, please talk to me like a little kid so that I can understand, because he was talking really, really fast. And then all of a sudden, he grabs my arm and like tries to make me stand up. I'm like, what? And he basically tells me I need to transfer to another bus. I'm like, okay, so I just quickly grab myself in the back corner of the bus. I'm like running by everybody. My bag is, I'm sure, hitting people. And it's really chaotic. And one of the guys grabs me and like walks me to this other bus and like puts me on. I'm like, okay, I guess this is where we're going. So I make my way onto this bus and I try not to go to the very back, which is where I had to sit on the last bus. And my knees are hitting against the metal seat in front of me. It's super uncomfortable. I'm holding on with both hands, which is why I have very little footage of this ride. But at this point, I can see the lake. I know I'm getting close. Then the bus stops and everybody gets off. So I'm like, okay, I guess I'm getting off too. And I have no clue what's going on. And so I listen for this guy yelling, pana, 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 which is the local term for Panajachel, which is the city that I was going to, or the village. And so I like run over there and I get on. And this guy, I don't think he touched the brake. And by the time we got close enough to the city, I just hopped off. I was definitely super far away and ended up having to walk about 25 minutes in the hot sun, on dirt roads to the place where I've never been, and I survived my first chicken bus. Okay, the next journey that I want to talk about is actually my boat journeys on the lake. I was pretty excited to get on a boat again, but it was definitely different than any of the sailboats that I've been on before. The lake that I was on in Guatemala is called Lake Atitlán. It's sometimes referred to as the Lake Como of Central America. It is extremely beautiful, but if you picture a big lake dotted around the coast with little villages, the easiest and safest way to get between the villages is actually to take like a boat taxi. And the way that you catch these boat taxis is you walk to the wharf or to the dock where all the boats are. And there's, again, usually guys, you know, saying the names of the different villages. Where do you want to go? You tell them where you want to go. You pay the tourist price, which is a lot more than local price, which is totally fine. Totally support that. And then they kind of just wait until the bus or until the boats fill up before they go between village and village. And it's not a direct route. They usually will go in a certain direction, hitting the different villages that everybody needs to stop at. It's pretty informal, obviously. And it was super pleasurable, and it was so much fun because I'd heard so many horror stories about these boat rides, about water coming in and things flying everywhere, and I'd only had really, really good experiences until the last day. I had taken a boat over to the village of San Marcos, which is known as kind of like the hippie town. It's where like all the yoga retreats happen. And I was having a great time. I was having a delicious lunch, this stunning view of the lake. And then I noticed that the wind started to pick up. And I understand that, you know, it gets windier in the afternoon. Usually if you can get your boat rides in before the afternoon, before the wind starts up, you're golden. I waited too long. I was having too much fun in San Marcos and the wind had started to pick up. So by the time I got in the boat, it was already rocking when it was just, you know, docked at the wharf. There was water coming in. We were all soaking wet. And you just literally had to hold on for dear life. And it wasn't until a couple days later I was like, wow, why is my bum like bruised? Oh yeah, it's because we would hit wave after wave. The boat would catch air. And I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, I wonder how strong this boat actually is. And every now and then the boat driver would kind of turn so that we wouldn't hit a wave quite as hard, but not always. The next journey that I went on was actually a historical journey. After my time at the lake, I took a private shuttle that left at 4:45 a.m. to the city of Antigua. Now, Antigua is a beautiful town that's nestled kind of in a valley surrounded by volcanoes, one of which I got to watch spewing ash pretty consistently, which wasn't like nervous or anything, but definitely was something to think about. So I knew basically next to nothing about this town. I think the only thing that I actually knew was that Antigua used to be the capital of Guatemala before it was moved to Guatemala City. And I know the timeline, I didn't know why it happened. So one of the first things I did was I took a guided tour. It was one of those free walking tours. And it was so amazing because our guide was so knowledgeable. He was so passionate about his city and its history. As a historian, it was super fascinating because he's talking about these buildings and looking at these buildings that were constructed in, you know, the 1500s. And as an American, I mentioned this before, I was in Germany a few months ago and completely blown away by all the architecture and all the history that was there. These buildings were built either before or during the same time as a lot of these castles and structures were built in Europe. And I don't think we give them enough credit. So as our guide was talking about history, he was using names that, you know, we have heard of but never really put any kind of context into them. He was talking about the Mayan Empire and then like Montezuma, and he was talking about the explorers that came over from Europe, and like, it was nothing. And it was one of those surreal moments where you kind of put these two worlds together and realize that these cities were contemporaries of these massive powers in Europe. And he was talking about, I'm not gonna go too much into the details because let's be honest, rote memorization of dates and names of people is probably why most people get turned off from history. But to understand the connection, the time frame that they were in, it was unbelievable. And I would be walking around this town on my own and come around a corner and there's this huge ruin just kind of like sitting there, and I'd read the little plaque and it would talk about, how it was the first this built in 1547 by, this Spanish or Portuguese conquistador or whatever. And what? It was so cool. And the realization I had was just, again, a reaffirmation of how much I love history. I love learning about local history and seeing it in real life. When you get to walk through history, it carries so much more than just reading it in a textbook. Got the airport right here, so every now and then you'll hear a plane going over. It's the biggest city in Central America, so there's always traffic, horns, and sirens, which leads me to my next journey that I went on, which was the journey to Guatemala City, or Guate, or I'm not gonna try to pronounce it the way the locals do. Going from a lakeside village where the only real way to get there is these windy mountain roads, where the population is almost 50% local Mayans, and a handful of tourists on the main drag, to a beautiful city in the mountains where there's a ton of backpackers partying, tons of history, but still only a town of, say, 40 to 50,000 people, to Guatemala City, which, according to Siri, has over 1 million people living here. It was a journey to get here, both mentally and physically. The journey I want to talk about is actually the mental part, because when I did my research for coming to Guatemala, because like I said, I had very little information. But the information that I found from trusted sources said that most people fly into Guatemala City maybe for a day just to kind of get their bearings and then head off to the lake and spend the majority of their time either around the lake, going up to the Caribbean side to go to the ruins at Tikal, or staying in Antigua and hiking all these volcanoes. That very rarely did people actually stay in the big city. So I followed the travel bloggers' advice and the articles that I read and planned my trip that way, where I spent most of my time at the lake, a couple of days in Antigua, and then finishing out my trip here in Guatemala City. And that's when I realized how different I am from people, because I have zero regrets from this trip. I have loved every moment of it, even the hard parts. But I think if given the chance to do it again, I would book more time in the big city, because I am a big city girl. This is the journey that I came on, was a self-realization that I love quaint mountain towns, little lakeside villages. I love visiting them. But my heart will always be in a big, bustling metropolis where there are dangerous parts, there are safe parts, there are tons of people everywhere, the sights, the sounds, the smells. Every night I've been going to bed with the windows wide open, light pouring in, sirens everywhere, and I've been so content with where I've been. So the journey was more of a mental journey and understanding that, yeah, I love big cities. My travel style is very different from others. My adventure style is very different, and big cities is where I find the most adventure, the most activities that match or that align with my travel and adventure style. So this last journey that I want to tell you about actually happened yesterday, and I was still kind of reeling from the whole experience. And it's one of those adventures that, as a traveler, you really hope this will happen to you. It's not something that you can plan on, but when it does, you're over the moon excited. You struggle to pick up the camera to record it because you really don't want to kill the moment. But I managed to get a couple of shots of this. So, like I keep telling you, I had very little information about Guatemala City, so naturally I wanted to go on a tour. I didn't want to pay for one, so I found a really awesome looking self-guided tour. And so yesterday I took an Uber into the center of town to start this tour. And when I got out of my Uber in like the Central Park, like the main square, there were tons of tents set up and tons of music coming from the center of the square. And it sounded like marimba, so I went to go check it out. And it ended up being this really awesome celebration of the history of the marimba in Guatemala. What? So I approach the gate because I'm just looking to see like what's going on before I continue my tour, and one of the security guards just beckons me in because obviously I stand out. I'm a white girl and I'm wearing hot pink yoga pants. Just, I mean, tourist. And so I come in and, you know, I'm sitting in the back just admiring the cultural experience that I just happened upon. And this, all of a sudden, this cute old man sits next to me and starts talking to me in English. And I was completely taken aback because, yes, I understand that many people around the world speak English, but I am definitely not arrogant enough to expect people to speak English to me when I am in a different country where the main language is not English. So I'm always pleasantly surprised when somebody approaches me and starts talking to me in English. And I sat and chatted with this man, Oscar, for a really long time, and was currently living in Seattle but visiting his family back in Guatemala City. And he kept asking me if I wanted to dance with him because there was a ton of couples that were up dancing at the front next to the stage where all these marimbas were being played, and I don't like to dance. It actually is quite painful to my hips to dance, especially when they're just kind of like rocking back and forth. But he kept asking, and I said, you know what? This is gonna be a great story. So I said yes. We walked up to the front and we started dancing. I am not a tall person. I'm a big girl, but I'm not tall. I was a full head taller than Oscar. So we looked like the odd couple out there, but it doesn't matter at that point. I didn't know anybody there. I was having a good time. And then he wanted to just walk around with me. And I was thinking, gosh, I really want to go on this tour, but I've got this gentleman here who just wanted to buy me gifts. He gave me a cute little keychain that I put on my bag. He wanted to buy me something. He wanted to get me a drink. He just wanted to spend time with me. And I was so taken aback because, like I said, this is something that you dream of happening to you as a traveler. But because it doesn't happen, you're a little wary at first. Like, okay, what are your intentions? What do you want? Am I gonna be paying you for all this stuff? We have a hand on my bag, which is sad, but it's the reality. I was in Central Park in Guatemala City. So while this was all going on, while we were dancing, and while we were walking back to our seating place at the back of the tent, I was going through this journey in my mind, like, okay, what do I do in this situation? And I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna trust this guy. I trust my instinct, and I wasn't having any big red flags coming up. I trust my gut, and so I said, I'm gonna give this guy the benefit of the doubt, and I'm just going to trust him. And he just wanted to walk around, hold my hand, not like normal hold hands, but like interlocking fingers holding hands, walking around. And it was so sweet because he bought me a purse, he bought me this like shaved ice thing, and then later I was thinking, oh, I probably shouldn't have had that ice because you're not supposed to drink the water in Guatemala. But so far so good with the tummy stuff. And it was great because then he wanted to show me all these things, and he wanted me to take me down to the Central Market, which was one of the biggest things that I wanted to do. It's this huge market that's full of like just tons of stuff. It's this huge maze, kind of like a bazaar would be in the Middle East and Northern Africa, where you just weave around and there's stuff from floor to ceiling. There were 2 levels. The top level was like stuff, the lower level was food and restaurants. And it was great to have him around because I've never really had to haggle before or negotiate for prices, let alone in a different language. So I was super nervous to do that because there were a few things that I did want to purchase, even though I'm not a big souvenirs person. And having him with me meant that I didn't have to, because I would show interest in something and he would just automatically ask them how much it was. When they would say something back, he would just shake his head, roll his eyes, and give them a completely different number, and they would finally relent. So I ended up getting stuff for what I consider to be the local price. Every now and then he would say, let me take your picture, let me make a video for you. And so it was just one of those wholesome interactions that I'd had, and he just kept thanking me for having a good day with him, because he said, thank you for talking with me, which I thought was super sweet and innocent. Thank you for spending time with me. Thank you for dancing with me. Thank you for letting me buy you this. Thank you for letting me do this with you. And I had to stop and think, do we act that way when we find somebody from a different country visiting our hometown? And so it just made me think of how I treat other people and how that interaction made me feel, how it appeared to make him feel, and how I'm going to remember that for a really, really long time. Oh man, I am sad to be leaving. Those were just a few of the many adventures and many journeys that I've been on. I don't want to leave Guatemala City. This place is everything I want when I travel and when I adventure. It's rough around the edges, it's raw enough, I have so much to learn, but I can't be too sad because I have an awesome trip coming up in just a few weeks that I need to get ready for. I actually just booked my accommodations last night while I was thinking about it. Now it's time to pack. I'm already tired thinking about this travel journey to get home. But I wanted to show you my view. So until our next adventure,